All right, friends, this is day 36 in our online Bible study looking at the Gospel of John. And today we're starting a new chapter in John, chapter 5. We're going to be in one story this week. And today we're going to look at the beginning of that story, verses 1 through 9. Now, we're not going to be able to be exhaustive in the next few minutes of verses 1 through 9. And I don't often do this, but I'm going to recommend that you check out the sermon from yesterday because the sermon from yesterday, we talk a lot about these 9 verses. And a little bit more than that, but you'll get more of kind of an exhaustive look at this passage in that sermon. But here's what I want to really highlight in our Bible study time today. In here, there's a number, and numbers often mean something in the scriptures. We often hear the number 7, we've talked about that. Often the number 40, both those are kind of numbers of completeness or wholeness. Numbers means something. There's a number in here that isn't one of those numbers that we normally hear. The number 38. That's how long this person that we read about today, I hope you've already read it, has been suffering, how long they've been suffering. Why 38? Okay, there's only one other place that there's a 38-year period of time, and that's way back in the Old Testament. So we're going to do kind of a deep dive here, deep dig into the Old Testament really, really quick. The Jews, they weren't called the Jews at the time, they were the Israelites, God's chosen people. You'll remember they were in slavery in where? In Egypt. They were set free, God set them free through Moses' leadership, through the Red Sea, and then they ended up in the desert, in the wilderness. And there was a period of time where they were in the wilderness before they entered into the Promised Land. How long was that period of time between when they went through the Red Sea and into the Promised Land? How long was the time? 40 years. Okay, let me ask you another question. How long were they supposed to be there? This is the one we often don't know the answer to. How long were they supposed to be there? They go through the Red Sea, God leads them to Mount Sinai, they get the 10 Commandments, they get the law, all of that stuff, and then after they've done all of those things, they wander around for a little bit. God is clearly doing things during that time, forming them, molding them, shaping them, making them into a people who are no longer an enslaved people, but a free people, teaching them what it means to be a free people. And then he leads them to Kadesh, which is on the border. And from Kadesh, Moses sends out 12 spies to go spy out the land, preparing to send the people in to take over the land. Do you know how long it was between when they went through the Red Sea and they went up to Kadesh? You know how long that was? It was 2 years. That's how long they were supposed to be in the wilderness. Those spies come back. There are 12 of them. 11 of them say, look, the land is great. It's awesome. But we can't go in there. There are all kinds of big folk in there. There's no way that we can conquer that land. One of them, Caleb, says, no. We got to go. We got to go in. But the people listen to the 11 and they don't go in. And then they have to go back into the wilderness. For how long? 38 more years. They were supposed to only be there 2 years. They ended up there 40 years. 38 of those years, they didn't need to be there. And they were there because they didn't trust, because they didn't have faith to go on into the land. And they were there because rather than listening to the one person who was Caleb, they listened to the 11 and they get sent back in. So why is it that this man has been suffering for 38 years? Again, I think the number is important. And I think what we're seeing here is that suffering is inevitable. We all suffer. I mean, later on, Jesus is going to say, look, here's the thing. Like it's the suffering is inevitable. The world will always be filled with troubles. But don't worry, I've overcome the world. The suffering is necessary. We all walk through that. But sometimes we stay in the suffering longer than we have to. I mean, look at what Jesus says to the man. After he met him, what Jesus says to him is he says, do you want to get well? Now, sometimes we insert the word even in there, like, do you even want to get well? And the implication is this man doesn't really want to be made well. I don't think that it's that. I think the man does want to be well. And what he says is, sir, I have no one to help me into the pool when the waters get stirred up. For more context on that, again, look at the sermon. You'll notice there's one verse that's missing here. We talked about that in the sermon yesterday. He says, look, here's the deal. Yes, I want to be well, but I can't get in the waters. And what those waters represent, I think, is they represent like kind of superstition. Like this man, he's putting his hope in being healed by these waters that there's nothing supernatural about them. And the verse that you'll read in the bottom of here, that verse is not original. right? It got added later. I think what's happening here is that this man is listening to the wrong voices. He's listening to the 11. And he's putting his hope in this thing that really has no power. And really, what can alleviate his suffering, what can soften his suffering, what can start a new life for him is the man who just happened to walk up on him. You see, sometimes we stay in the suffering longer than we need to. The suffering is inevitable. But sometimes, while the suffering only needed to last 2 years, it ends up lasting 38. Why? Because we listen to the wrong voices. Why? Because we rely on things to get us out of that don't actually have the power to. I mean, in some ways, we're like this guy, sitting by these pools, thinking that these pools, that's what's going to save us, when the thing that can actually soften our suffering is Jesus himself. So, what are you trusting in that doesn't actually have the power to heal you? Like, how is it that you're suffering, and what are you trusting to soften your suffering? What pool are you laying next to? That, look, here's the deal. You couldn't avoid the suffering at the beginning, but maybe you've been spending long enough thinking that this other thing is going to fix it. And maybe what's going to fix it is allowing God to get his hands on that in your life. Again, that doesn't just look like prayer and scripture reading, though it looks like that. Sometimes it looks like counseling. Sometimes it looks like inviting a friend into it. Is it possible that God is seeking to soften your suffering? And if so, what would it look like to invite God into that place of suffering? God bless you, friends. We're going to keep with this story, and we'll see you again tomorrow.